Hello, everybody. This is Rebecca Piazza, and I am here with Paul Absher. I'm doing a series of web interviews on a whole bunch of different topics that surround writing and different ways to approach and things that can help and hurt and all that good stuff. So, thank you, Paul, for coming with us. If you just want to introduce yourself a little bit.
Hi, I'm Paul. Currently out here in Missouri, originally from California, then to Arizona, Texas, then back to California, and now I'm here. And my story is I do online role play, writing stuff, not so much the D&D sort of thing. And yeah, that's me in a nutshell. I'm here with my fiance Jackie, and I'm an Air Force officer, and hence the reason why I've been around the country, the United States, as much as I have.
And other places.
And other places. I've also been to Qatar out in the Middle East. It's right next to that super friendly country, Iran, for those of you who are unaware.
But it's a beautiful place, and you had very nice weather, so, you know.
Well, it got nice in the winter, except for the fog that was as thick as a pea soup.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, we had snow this morning, so what are you gonna do? All right, so today we're talking about online role-playing games and their connection to writing in some way, shape, and form. So role-playing games, and jump in here anytime you want to, Paul. Role-playing games, especially online ones, I'm talking about the ones where you have to participate in some sort of story, respond to others, and there's a bunch of different formats. There's the email-based, there is forum-based, where you're almost in a chat room type scenario, responding that way. There are things like the, I can't even think of a specific game at the moment, but there are the games where you can play through and be chatting at the same time to people. I'm talking more about the ones where you actually have to create everything from scratch, from your imagination, that sort of thing. Anything to add there, Paul?
I don't know. You on the head. It could be any theme. A lot of people like to choose a popular show based off of Star Wars, Star Trek, Lord of the Rings. I've even seen some do Aliens or Starship Troopers, stuff like that.
I've even seen Buffy the Vampire Slayer ones. That could be interesting. So Paul and I had met years and years ago. I think we're going on about, well, it must be about 18 years ago now, because I met you about a year before I met my husband. So believe it or not, we've known each other for 18 years. And we met on a Star Trek role-playing game. I can't remember that one. I'm pretty sure we pretty much did the email-based for the most part.
It was email-based.
Some forum, I think.
It was email-based, and I think when they decided to transfer over different web servers, they went to a more forum-based sort of thing.
Yeah, same kind of idea though, where you're basically creating a story, leaving spots for other people to interact, or like Paul and I used to do, we would go on chat, write together entire stories, and then publish them together on the websites. Okay, so that covers what is RPGs. I want to talk a little bit about what is the allure of a role-playing game, and I'm gonna let you go for that one first, and then I'll pitch in there, Paul.
Well, the allure for me was to kind of get immersed in whatever your favorite realm was. Our favorite realm was. I grew up watching Star Trek, starting from the original series and TNG, all the way through about Voyager. And so I always liked Star Trek and decided I wanted to play a part in that universe, and also as a way to kind of get these creative thoughts that were always in my head, like, oh, what if I wrote about this or this or this. And with an RPG, you're not alone in that thought process, and you can work with others, and you can get other ideas. and also, I mean, it's fun. I mean, I enjoy writing, but sometimes when I write, I'll get like maybe a chapter or two in, and I kind of just peter out. Whereas with people bouncing ideas off of each other's noggins, and quite frankly, the responsibility you have to actually respond to people, it certainly helps get the creative juices flowing.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you said that with responsibility, because this is something I was going to talk about later, but it comes in really great here. There's a responsibility too when you're doing role-playing games. If you're taking it seriously, there are people that do it just for really for shits and giggles. But if you're really taking it seriously, you have a responsibility to play your role the right way. Like in our games, we always had the no god, what was it, no god acting or whatever it was. So you couldn't just all of a sudden have every ability in the world and become captain of the ship and, you know, be the hero. You just couldn't. So I don't know. You had a bit of responsibility to know what role you were playing, to play that well, whether it was security or medical or tactical or whatever. And that was regardless of whether or not you actually had practical knowledge of it, which is nice. And there was always people along the way. I mean, I know, Paul, you helped me quite a bit with some of the roles. I had taken on security at one point, which probably wasn't the best role for me. But, you know, it's a matter of helping people out, but trying to stay within that time frame and within that role that you've established for yourself and within the scheme of the ship or the game in general. That's really important.
That kind of later too, what I saw you had was, you know, kind of expanding your view and expanding your mind. I mean, playing roles that you never thought you would. Like the very first RP I played, I was a science officer. I like science well enough, but well, I prefer Marines, I prefer intelligence, I prefer some sort of military like role. But I mean, playing the science officer is very interesting. It was definitely a different realm than I was expecting to play.
Yeah, and I think the one thing going back to the allure for us was the fact too that with playing something like the Star Trek or even Star Wars or any of those science fiction type games, you can create species and you can create new cultures and things like that. And even though things like Star Trek have a pretty good basis to go off of, because obviously Gene Roddenberry created this whole, well, and from all the spin-offs and all that, created this whole universe. And there's now encyclopedias and all that good stuff. You could still create quite a bit, and you could still create special aspects of that culture or of that species that hadn't been touched on before and run with it.
Yeah, I mean, especially Star Trek, the canonical universe only relies on the movies and the shows and all that. You only really follow, for the most part, the Enterprise. Barring DS9 or barring Voyager, it's always the Enterprise from NX-01 all the way to the E.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's see. You're using role playing to explore different styles. So things like point of view, if you've never written point of view, certain point of views before, and different themes and genres. I found role playing games were great for that. They really make you step out of your comfort zone, well, very often. Or sometimes you're forced out of your comfort zone because of what the storyline is doing. And because you're forced to react, it's just a very interesting way to stretch yourself and to make you develop in that way. Any thoughts?
I would say I agree with that. So it also gives you the freedom to explore different styles. So for those of you who aren't aware of generally how a Star Trek roleplay plays, you have a mission. Think of it as a season in a show or a episode, and you have a definite beginning, definite end, boom, done, and then you go on to the next. Now there could be an overarching storyline with one of the characters, but for the most part, you have that. So from each season to season, you can explore a different theme. I've seen missions go, you know, completely tactical, comical, or tactical military, and then some that go comical, some that go more diplomatic, calm, some that are more scientific. But they all have different themes that you can explore, and it does get you out of that comfort zone. I mean, I mean, if I'm not necessarily comfortable about writing something sciency or something more medical or something more caring or calming, then being in that role where I have to play that, especially if I have a character that I never thought would be in that role, becomes very interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too that when you're put into that situation, whether it's willingly or not, where the mission changes or the theme changes, um, just like I like the way you said it's like an episode because it is, and just like any episode on TV, sometimes you'll find certain players become sidelines, which is okay because you don't have to be, on 24/7. It's interesting when everybody is, and we've certainly been on ships where everybody's been really, really active all the time. But then it's nice to have those episodic type things where you'll have one person or a couple people that kind of take over the mission, and everybody else is just waiting to see what happens, and they'll filter through here and there. They obviously have to react to things that are going on and do their jobs, but it's just very interesting how that happens. Sorry.
No, I definitely agree, and I think a good mark of somebody who can role play well is even if you're a sideline character, you can generally find something to do. I mean, it's kind of like what I tell people at work. It's like just because you're not the focus right now doesn't mean that you don't have something you can do. I mean, it could be something as simple as you visited the lounge, or you decide that you're going to go and tinker with some thing. You can generally find something.
Yeah, it was always interesting. You can tell when someone was bored because they typically ended up in the bar.
Generally,
Which is generally nice. Why we were on well, most of the time we were on games that were like 16 plus, so it was nice to, or flings happened and that sort of thing. It was always very interesting.
and that's the other thing too with this is, or with those kind of games, is things tend to progress more naturally. Like when you write a book, or whenever I write a story, I like to plan out, okay, well, this is how it's going to end. This is X, Y, and Z. This is what's going to happen in the middle. And then you just try to connect those pieces. Whereas in a role play, you might have an idea on where you want to end up, but everyone else gets a vote as well. And even something that may seem insignificant to somebody else becomes a very significant factor later on.
Yeah, that's true. You could have a little fact, two people meeting, or a bit of culture that's brought up in wherever it is, the bar or whatever, that later on in a later mission becomes so crucial that you can really develop it, flesh it out, and it becomes very interesting to see that develop as something major.
Well, for example, our first ship that we're on together, the Andromeda, I believe it was. My main character eventually became almost a secondary character to an NPC I played, non-player character. Um, Mostly because of the interaction that our characters were having. John was cool, but it kind of goes along too with the lines of evolving characters. Austin, my original character, was the very straight edged, hard charging Marine who can never do wrong. He was a white knight, and then you had Austin, who was a
Not.
everything else. I mean, he was not. He was pretty sarcastic. He was kind of an asshole. I mean, he was pretty much like a little bit like what I have become in real life, except he was badass.
He was the pre-version of you. That's nice.
Yeah. Maybe it's a little bit of me, or a little bit of future me coming on him.
Yeah, see, and my very, very first one, I can't even remember if that was before you were around or not. Probably just before you were around. My very, very first character was a completely new race and all that, and yeah, she ended up getting married and having kids, and then ended up sacrificing herself and dying on the ship. So things happen.
And so, I mean, has evolved over time. One thing to point out too is no matter how hard you try, there will always be something in your personality that tends to carry into a character. I mean, serious writers also know that in their characters, there's always something a little bit, or that's connecting them to them, and that's what keeps it interesting. So I start out with, awesome, like the vision of like what I wanted to be, like, strong, honorable man, and now I'm more into the, well, um, kind of, I'm kind of I'm sarcastic most of the time, and I'm kind of an asshole. So we're gonna go with that role. In a good way. I don't punch children, but
Oh, jeez. We don't punch children. That's a good thing to stand by. Yeah, probably good. Stick with that. Especially as you get married. Just typically stick with that. Yeah, I think you're right though. Every aware writer does know that a little bit of their personality always comes through in some way, which is a frightening thought. I know with the books that I've published, it's a really scary thought to think that, considering my main character is a murdering schizophrenic psychopath. But yeah, there's always a little aspect of you that comes through, and there's aspects that you can choose to come through, just to give them a little more humanity, which is really important in these games because you don't want something really distant. And I think that's where some of the places that we've role played, aside from the participation being really down, I think part of it was the fact that people were trying to create such unique characters that they didn't have any humanity to them. They were just writing this completely disconnected. I don't even want to call them a person because they weren't even a person. They were completely unbelievable as a character.
Well, and that kind of goes with one of the problems that we've often encountered too, kind of going off the fact they weren't human, is you tend to get into the whole, you have like the perfect man and the perfect woman, the whole like, I am awesome at everything, I have no weaknesses, which sounds amazing, but me personally, I don't find it interesting. Like, Superman is one of my least favorite superheroes, not because of his abilities, but because of the fact that he is too perfect that writers have to come up with some asinine way that they're going to go and try to weaken him. I always found characters like Batman or Iron Man or something like that a lot more interesting because they have a weakness. I mean, Batman's superpower is that he has lots of money, but he's still just a man that can be beaten. Now, granted, very difficultly, but he can still be beaten.
Yeah, and the people you mentioned, or the superheroes you mentioned too, they're deeply flawed, which makes them so much more interesting. And that makes me think of when we were playing games. Even when you thought you were doing really good at your job and doing things right, it was really easy for your superiors to come back and basically pull the carpet out from beneath you and make some new rule or put in some aspect of the mission that supposedly they knew that you didn't, that now you've screwed up, that sort of thing. And it was always a very good way to make a lot of tension. And yeah, you actually hated them for a while because you felt like they were going after you. But if they were good writers, they weren't actually, they were just advancing the plot. And if you reacted the right way, it could really make for a good story.
And humility is really an important part of those games too, realizing where your weaknesses are, because only realizing your weaknesses can really actually like improve on them, I guess.
Yeah.
If I know that I'm terrible at writing, scene where I'm basically doing nothing, like giving a report or something, then I can learn how to write that. Or if I don't know how to properly write a scene where I'm just, disciplining a subordinate, then I learn how to do that. Not quite different than my real life situations at times, but I still haven't quite figured out that one. I can write it, I really just can't do it in real life. Not well.
But you know what? A really good writer too will be able to take those scenes that are really mundane, something like filling out reports, and they'll still be able to make them interesting. It may not be a long post that they do, but I mean, you can make it really human and advance the plot just by having something like writing a report, and the next thing you know, the character's looking off into the distance and thinking about that vacation they're going to be on soon, that leave, or spouse they left, or whatever back on a certain planet or whatever. Like you can make it a really humanized post and make it very interesting, and all you're doing is just signing on the dotted line, which is quite interesting actually. Not the signing on a dotted line, but the posting.
And kind of, I guess, with the previous statement I made of having personal experience with certain aspects, and going on with what you had said earlier about having or not having previous experience. Or I mentioned before, my job is military, and one thing as I get more and more into this job, and Jackie can probably tell you how so whenever you play these role plays, everyone's like action, 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 and it's kind of funny when you realize, like, I honestly think 80 to 90% of a real Starfleet officer's career is paperwork, with the other 10% being banging their head against the wall because of the fact that they're doing paperwork. But that's not the interesting part. But the challenge is, can you make that interesting?
Yeah, definitely. And this is a little side note, and I don't know why I always thought this was hilarious, but I always thought it was funny too when you're role playing, because you actually take the time to write down things like you have to go to the bathroom first, or you have to go take a shower, that sort of thing. You never see that on the actual episodes of these shows and movies and that kind of thing. You just assume they have, I don't even know what, but I find it's interesting how those little tiny mundane things get mentioned that really don't matter, but they just, I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's also a way to add character to the character. Or for instance, like, say I write a character and he gets up and he goes and he shaves. How does he shave? Does he use some new whiz bang that they have in the future where he just clicks a button, and a phaser goes over his face and, oh, well, I'm clean shaven? Or does he take an old school, like, straight razor and take his time to do it? That can
That's
tell
true.
you a bit about a character. I always found that it's the small things that give away a person, not necessarily the big things.
That's very true. It tells you a lot about their personality too, about if they appreciate time and if they appreciate the finer things in life or the older things, or yeah, it tells you a lot about the character. You're right. Was there anything else you wanted to mention about how a writer's play style evolves?
Um, Not really. I mean, beyond, again, mentioning the fact that the characters I write now are different than the characters I write back then, but also I find that I can write more different kinds of characters as well. I mean, you just things that you learn, and you learn from other people, and you just learn from your own experience.
Yeah,
It
that's
also,
true.
it also may be that you have a split personality, but yeah.
Yeah, it's true. All right, so wrapping up here, a little advice for people interested in role-playing games, and I'm gonna aim that towards people who are actual writers interested in role-playing games, because again, there's always people that that aren't really writers, they just like to be in the universe, that sort of thing. The reason why I'm aiming it more towards writers is because, well, we're both writers, and it's just, I think it's a little bit different when you're aiming it towards that group, because they're interested typically in getting better at what they do and that sort of thing. Like, I know me personally, I couldn't know half the things I do about writing if I hadn't been on role-playing games, I have to say. And if for nothing else, just for the reactionary benefit of it, being able to have something happen in a story and knowing that I can react and change it and go with it or whatever. It was a huge benefit having that as a background.
Well, you're back. So yeah, I mean, that's important. That whole reactionary, being able to do that. So, well, my advice would be more along the lines of, for writers, I would, if you can get a sample of how they post. So this is where, like, a forum game would come into play, and see how they write, and if, most of the people playing, like, write like the minimum, like, 200 words or however many they set, and they don't post often. I just skip it, even if the concept sounds interesting. Like, this starship is exploring the Gamma Quadrant, and they have all these cool toys, but they're not doing anything with it. I'd skip it. I'd much rather post on a ship that's like, oh, we're a freighter that transports supplies between colonies. But if they post like a page or two every week and everyone does that, then that's a much more interesting story. Because, and also I've learned this being in the military, it's not so much the mission as it is the people. Um, especially on role plays, like you can have a great mission, you have a great ship, like the best ship in the line and whatnot, but if no one's doing anything with it, it's bullshit. It's much more, or it's much better to have the dingy old, cargo craft, so long as everyone's playing and everyone's interacting, because in the end, that's what makes these things fun, and that's where you learn.
Yeah,
You
there's
can,
nothing worse than joining a role playing game and then finding out nobody except for you is posting anything. You're not going to get very far playing alone.
yeah, because at that point, it's just like you're in a ghost town, like you're playing a video game and you're the only character there. Other advice too is, and there's gonna be two opposite spectrums, but it depends on what you're looking for, I suppose. Post somewhere that you're or you can go find something that you're comfortable with. So if you're a fan of a specific genre, trust me, if you're a fan of it, chances are there's somebody out there that's role playing. So if you want to role play Gilmore Girls or something,
Oh my god. Is
um,
this from experience, Paul?
I'm actually saying more for the benefit, Jackie, but I can either confirm or deny that fact. But if you, but I'm just saying, if you want to, because I've seen, as I said, I've seen like Starship Troopers.
Oh, there's everything.
So whatever you want, you can have it. So you can choose something that you're comfortable with. And that kind of goes back to the role thing, right? Like I generally play military-ish roles or intelligence roles because that's what I do. So therefore, I know when I say, hey, we're going to go ahead and ambush them in an L formation, I know what that means. Or if I say, hey, we caught this off of a SIGINT source, I know what that means. Or if you want to challenge yourself, you can still go with that universe that you feel comfortable with, but choose a different role. Or, choose a different show completely. Like, maybe I don't know anything about Buffy the Vampire Slayer, so I'm going to go ahead and research. And reading in general makes you a better person. I don't care what you read. So,
Agreed.
well, it's not Mein Kampf, I suppose. But it will be most reading will make you better. When it comes to themes, and that's where it gets really even more nitty gritty. So some of the more popular ones, more popular shows, genres like Star Trek, for instance, you have different themes. And sometimes they're rated, or sometimes they're going like PG-13, PG-15, 18 plus or whatnot. So you have more freedom to be as aggressive, to throw as much language out as you want.
Yeah, I think it's very important to look at those rules once you pick a ship or pick a game. Make sure you pay attention to those rules because it really sucks when you join and then find out that it's a 13 plus and that you can't swear and that you can't do any, that you're restricted. If you're okay with that, then that's great. But if you're something like an erotica writer, that's probably not going to be the place for you.
Or I mean, and being on an 18 plus ship too does give you freedom. Even if you don't really go above the 18 plus, like being able to curse freely, like a normal person would if they're in a situation like, they've been duped, they're in a trap. Because I know how I would react. I would react. I'd probably curse a lot and punch a lot of things. So there's that, and also different themes. Again, going back and looking how they write. If you can ask whoever the person is or who's running the ship, if you can't read their posts, if they can get some examples, is this ship is it an actual ship like where people have their roles and they're doing a mission? Is it more comical? Is it the Love Boat? Whatever floats your boat. And none of those are wrong. None of those are right. It's all up to your personality. Personally, I want a ship as a community. I want a ship to run as a ship. However, if some of the comedy rolls through or some of the love boatness rolls through, that's fine, so long as the ship's the ship. There are some people that more would want kind of that cruise ship atmosphere, or some that would rather have the comedy atmosphere.
Yeah,
or
that's
horror
true.
atmosphere for that matter.
Yeah, and I think it's important too that if you're experiencing role playing games for the first time, ask around and see if you know anybody that is already on one of the games or is interested in joining with you. There's always, fun in numbers and safety in numbers, and they can help you transition into that because it can be, depending on the game, a little bit of a, I don't know, a little bit of a shock getting into that atmosphere of writing with people and against people and creating things, and it can be quite interesting, but it can be quite shocking. So sometimes it's best to have a friend with you if you can, to help you along. And the other thing I wanted to say is you're online, so be safe. Use regular online etiquette. It's okay to give people your name in some way, maybe just your first name, something like that. But until you really know somebody, um, and I don't know how you gauge that really, but don't be telling them everything. Don't be telling them financial information, all that stuff. I think it's kind of a given, but there's so many people nowadays that are scammed. You have to be safe when you're online. That's like the number one thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, be safe. Don't tell anybody. However, said don't be to talk to people, so long as you are smart about it.
Yeah.
And Becca and I have known each other for well, you mentioned it, probably 18 years. I don't know. I don't.
Could be longer. I don't even know.
Doubt that it's longer.
I don't know.
It's definitely over a decade and a half at this point. So you can make great friends out of this, out of role playing games and whatnot. But as long as you're smart, but like I said, don't shy away from talking to people. Just you know, like I said, be smart about it.
Yeah.
And you learn a lot. And also learn that, like real life, people aren't going to always like you. There have been a couple of crew members I've had that I may have gotten upset with, or more likely they've gotten upset with me, especially in my later years of simming or role playing, where they're like, well, I will say like, hey, a gun can't do that. It's like, oh well, how do you know? I'm like, because I own them and I use them, and that doesn't work, or what you're saying doesn't really make sense. And then people, of course, I mean, most of the time they're like, oh, okay. But sometimes they'll get really indignant. So don't, you're going to get you may get some confrontation, but for the most part, people in this community are fairly friendly because they want that social interaction. Otherwise, they just write some gloomy story and post it on the blog and hope they get some clicks.
Yeah, that's true. All right. Any last thoughts, or is that?
So if you decide to go and role play, which I highly suggest you do. I mean, I've been out of the game for a while. Life is definitely well, life is full of surprises, and I've been getting a lot of them lately. Some of them good, some of them not as good, but not necessarily bad. But if you have the time and you have the gumption to do it, and you just want to see how it's like, I would suggest going for it. Find something maybe a little slower pace, or something that's comfortable for you at first, and then expand. And I can't tell you how many ships I've been on because I don't really keep track, and sometimes they're short lived. I'm only on there for a month because I realized that I chose poorly. Sometimes I'm on there for years until the captain leaves and the ship goes to hell. So And I just juggling around too. I mean, if you're only looking for bit rolls, which again I would suggest you do, get something small. Then maybe you can put yourself on different vessels or different genres or different role plays in general and figure out what you like.
That's a really good point. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's everything we had here. So I'd like to thank Paul for joining me, and very nice conversation. And if you have any questions about role playing, or you would like to be in on the conversation, please let us know. I'm going to be posting this on YouTube and Facebook and all that good stuff, and we'd love to hear what you think. And we'd love to one day sim with you guys. That'd be fantastic. We'd love to have new friends. So thank you very much, Paul, and that's it. Bye.